This presentation was for Invasive Species Week in 2025 as part of a series of talks by the Nature Commission. Invasive Species Week is an annual event, usually taking place in May, to raise awareness of invasive non-native species and how everyone can prevent their spread. Invasive non-native species, or commonly known as INS, are those that are introduced intentionally or unintentionally outside of their natural geographic range, causing environmental, social and/or economic impacts. The main part of this presentation is going to be focusing on the work of the Guernsey Conservation Volunteers, who remove a lot of invasive plants around Guernsey. Now, GCV, as they are abbreviated to, have been actively conserving the natural environment since 1996, but it wasn't from the very beginning that they started removing invasive species, but they do regularly remove INS annually now. So the first plant that we'll talk about as part of INS management done by GCV is Cape Ivy. Now, Cape Ivy was first recorded in Guernsey in 1974, so relatively recently in botanical years. And this plant, also known as German ivy, was probably brought into Guernsey as a house plant or a garden plant, and then it has escaped into the natural areas and escaped out of gardens. Now, this could be where plants have just literally grown outside of the garden, or there's a possibility that people have dumped garden waste where they shouldn't be dumping garden waste, and that has caused these plants to spread. Now, with the removal of this invasive plant, it usually takes place in the early months of the year when most of the other vegetation has died back. So it's very much easier to see the bright green leaves of Cape Ivy. And you can see in the middle photograph here, GCV are removing this plant on coastal areas, and they work in two different coastal areas with this plant. And it's quite unusual to find it in coastal areas because it's mainly in the upper parishes of the island on earth banks or hedge banks. That's where it's mainly found. And it is a real threat to our rare local plants, particularly our ferns that grow on these hedge banks. And the Cape Ivy can just grow and smother these rare plants as well as all the other plants, but lots of these earth banks are actually in private ownership. So we are hoping that the work of the Guernsey Conservation Volunteers raises awareness of the problems caused by this plant, in hope that the private landowners will start to remove it on their land. Another invasive plant is three-cornered garlic, commonly known as stinking onions. And there is a pilot project going on at the moment in Bluebell Wood. And this is going on because the stinking onions are really taking over from the bluebells, and they are becoming more dominant in many areas of Bluebell Wood. Now, the stinking onions were first recorded in Guernsey in 1847. Once again, probably brought in as a garden plant. And then they very much like the climate on our island, and they started to take over, and they're now spread to a wide lot of areas in Guernsey. Now, as you can see in this top photograph, in April 2022, this photograph was taken, and this is an area at the side of Bluebell Wood where you can see all the white flowers of the stinking onions, and it's very much an area where the stinking onions were taking over. You can see a few bluebells in the bottom left corner of that photograph, but it is mainly stinking onions. And this area was chosen because it's at the side of Bluebell Wood, away from the main core area of bluebells. So the pilot project was going to take place in this area. So that photograph was taken before the work actually started in Bluebell Wood. So each year, since 2022. The work has gone on. So in October and November each year, the Guernsey Conservation Volunteers go into Bluebell Wood and they dig up the stinking onion bulbs and the leaves that are attached. As you can see in the middle photograph here, the brown area in the front of the picture is the area where the bulbs and leaves have been removed. And then the volunteers in this photograph are working on the area, and all of that green vegetation is leaves of the stinking onions. So the work is very carefully done, using a trowel, just digging very shallowly into the ground and digging up the stinking onion bulbs. This isn't a problem to the bluebells because the bluebells in October and November each year are still dormant, haven't started growing, and they are much deeper in the ground, whereas mature stinking onion bulbs are much closer to the surface, so they can be removed more easily, and it is very easy to see them as their leaves come through very early, so October and November, much before the bluebells. So in the bottom photograph there, you can see taken in April 2025. It's definitely been a successful trial. It's by no means a carpet of blue on that trial area, but it's certainly, if you compare the top photograph and the bottom photograph, it's certainly a lot less white than it used to be. And there are actually now more bluebells flowering in that area. But we have to have patience with this project because it generally takes bluebells going from seed to a flowering plant. It takes between 5 and 7 years. So this project will be going on for at least 5 years to see if we are getting more and more flowering bluebells in that area. But every year, Guernsey Conservation Volunteers return to this area, and they're now working on a much bigger area as well, and also in the main part of the woodland, once again removing as many stinking onion bulbs as possible. A big project, which we'll talk about in depth, is removing sour fig. Now, this is a plant which was native to South Africa, and the first record of it being in Guernsey was in 1886. And once again, probably brought to the island as a low maintenance garden plant. And also it's planted over German fortifications after World War II to sort of try and hide those German fortifications. It smothers native plants and it reduces biodiversity wherever it grows. So it grows in a very thick mat along the ground and just smothers everything. And because we have warmer winters, it very much likes our climate, and it isn't sort of knocked back by snow or ice or anything like that, because we rarely get those weather conditions in Guernsey now. So it just spreads and spreads. And looking at this map, which was produced by the States of Guernsey from 1990, so the Guernsey map here shows red patches, a few of them on the south coast, a little bit on the west coast, and some right up on the northern tip of Guernsey, where you can see that sour fig was first mapped. So some smaller areas where it was living. And then when you look at this map of 2001, you can see the blue areas where it has spread quite considerably, particularly along the south coast cliffs, but also in the other areas that is present. And because of this spread, GCV was asked by the States of Guernsey if we could do a pilot project at Fort Pezeries. And Fort Pezeries, if you look at that little insert map, is down on the southwest corner of Guernsey, where the red arrow is pointing to. And this was a good place for a pilot project because it was very much an isolated headland with an extensive problem. So the hope was that the sour fig from this whole area would be removed because also it's a very accessible site. So a site visit was planned, and it was considered that it would be quite easy to remove, and with the hope that just a few skips would be needed to put the sour fig in. So at the first work party, just 2 skips were delivered for the first work party, and looking at the middle photograph there, GCV started removing the sour fig. And it was in a very, very short space of time, it was realised that the fig is very bulky indeed, and the 2 skips were filled very quickly, and piles of sour fig were then created so that an area could be cleared. But we didn't want to leave these piles for very long, so we needed to order more skips for the following Saturday, so that weekend we had 3 skips on site. We also realised very, very quickly that underneath the living green fig, there was a very thick pile of dead sour fig. And if any native plants were to have a chance of growing, we would need to remove the very thick layer of dead sour fig. So we use rakes to remove the dead sour fig, and that was also loaded into the skips. So we certainly realised that there was a very big job on our hands. We also realised that to maximise how much sour fig you could get in a skip, jumping in a skip was a very useful thing to do, to cram in as much as we possibly could. At this stage, we weren't sure whether any native plants would be able to grow. We had heard that potentially sour fig makes the soil very, very acidic, and the area might need to be reseeded. Because this was a pilot project, there was very much discovery going on as to how to manage a project like this and what the outcome would be. So for the next work party, 5 skips were actually delivered on site because it is very, very bulky. We had developed the method of loading sour fig onto tarpaulins, and with people carrying those over to the skip, dumping the sour fig in the skip, jumping on the sour fig to cram as much as possible into the skip, and you could clearly see where the sour fig was being removed. And we were starting to have an impact and starting to see the large areas that had been removed. But then, because this was very much a pilot project in a very visible public area, some complaints started to come in about the work that we were doing, because it was quite a shock to some people that going from an area of a green plant, it was now bare earth, and that caused a few problems. It was also attracting attention of a cartoonist for the Guernsey Press, and we also had a cartoon that was in the Guernsey Press. Those complaints were dealt with by the States of Guernsey. Work continued from 2008 into 2009, and we realised that every time we returned to the site, we needed to remove new shoots of sour fig, because shoots were growing. So it was trying to make a comeback, trying to take over again. So every time we went, we looked for the new sour fig shoots and we removed those, and then we would move on to the next main area of sour fig and start removing that. And it was very, very positive, because we could start to see that there was regrowth of native plants, which was absolutely fantastic, because as I just said previously, we weren't sure whether the seeds in the soil would still be viable. We weren't sure whether the soil would gave the right conditions for native plants to grow back. We weren't sure whether the whole area would need to be reseeded. So it was a real positive to see regrowth of native plants in the areas that we had removed sour fig. We also started to get good publicity. After the complaints came very positive publicity. We also had corporate groups helping, joining in, and helping with this project to remove the sour fig. And it was a real positive. We could see a whole variety of native plants coming back and growing and spreading, which was such a positive, as we weren't sure whether this would happen or not, but it was fantastic to see the change that was happening on this site where sour fig had been removed. So by 2010, we had completed the removal of the sour fig all the way around the fort. And in total, we had had 9 work parties. We'd filled 33 skips with sour fig. Just under 50 tonnes of fig had been removed, and it equated to about 400 hours of work. But it was complete, although there would be routine maintenance after that to keep returning to make sure any new sour fig shoots were removed, because we certainly didn't want the sour fig to start growing back and set back all the work that we had put in. So if you just have a look at these photographs, the top one taken before the work started in 2008, and then the bottom one taken after recovery of the site in 2018. You can see all the dark area in the top picture was the sour fig, and in the bottom picture it's very much a paler, more natural colour that you would expect of a coastal grassland area. And then when you look closely, the area just continues to improve. The top left, you can see pink of thrift. The middle on the left, you can see sea campion there. It's just a whole variety of native species now, a whole mosaic of things that are now growing there. And also you have all the associated insects that come and shelter in the area or feed on the plants. And then the Habitat Survey in 2018 came out, and there was a statement in that Habitat Survey which stated that sour fig has increased by 123% since it was first surveyed in 2010. This was a real disappointment to read, and it made us realise that we needed to do a lot more. We'd really only done 1 or 2 sites, but we needed to do a lot more work on removing sour fig in many places. So if we look, we had started this work in 2017 on the South Coast Cliffs at Latiel, and if we have a look at the first column of photographs on the left there, you can see there was extensive spread of sour fig, and then the middle column there you can see sort of a comparable photograph taken from a similar place of how things were changing. And then on the right hand column there you can see some of the initial plants that were coming back, so oxeye daisy, sheep's bit, and also this particular site is a site for Glanville fritillae butterflies. So it's great to remove sour fig as they need native plants, in particular ribwork plantain, in order to complete their life cycle. So we have much more of a variety of insects there now than there were when it was just sour fig. In 2020, we introduced another new site, and this was at Roos on the west coast. A particularly wet work party, as you can see in that top photographs. And you can see in the bottom photographs on the left, you can see how extensive the sour fig was in the area. And then the right-hand photo at the bottom, you can see where the sour fig was removed. And if we visited that site now, you can see it is completely taken over by native plants in that area, with the occasional sour fig shoot which will be removed. In 2021, we had a big push to remove sour fig, and there were many new sites. So Bordeaux, Fort Homay, Lerray Grassland, Lerray Headland, Lerray Shinglebank, Port Swaff, Port Infer, Pullias, Varzon, and also up in Alderney, we went up to that Northern Ireland to help them with removal of sour fig up there. And in 2022, we had some really big projects at Albeck, where we had a road closure to help with the removal there, and also at Fort Marchant, which was a very extensive problem on the headland there. And in 2023, the new sites that were added in were Burton Battery, Fort Doyle, another site at Leray, another site at the Tiel, the Pickerel, and we started at Rockane. We also, our work at Fort Doyle featured on a Channel 5 programme about Jersey and Guernsey. So lots and lots of removal across many sites, with the follow-up maintenance also on the previous sites where GCV had worked. And on returning to Les Tiels, where this project had started in 2018, the botany section of La Société did a botanical survey and recorded all of the new species that had returned to the site since the sour fig had removed. And they found 69 different plant species that had returned to the site since the removal of sour fig. So it just proves what a positive impact the removal of sour fig has on biodiversity. And going back to the original pilot site, it changes every year. There are more and more things happening down there every year, more plants growing. We now have a nest of blackback meadow ants behind the fort as well, which is quite an unusual place for them to live, as they normally live on the south coast cliffs. We have things like hairy bird's foot trefoil growing, which is a new plant on that site, and it just keeps developing and developing and moving on. So the biodiversity really is getting better year on year. It's worth talking about some other invasive species that we do have in Guernsey. Asian hornets first arrived in Guernsey in March 2017. And there is very quickly a programme was put in place to stop the extensive spread of Asian hornets. So each year there is what we call a spring queening, and that takes place from April to June, where pots are put out to attract queens. And each year many queens are caught in that way. But then from April to May, any primary nests, when they are found, are removed. And then from June to September, any secondary nests which have been made, which are generally much larger and generally more inaccessible as well, and much higher up in trees or on cliffs, that takes place. So those nests are removed. And during that time, we encourage members of the public to track, don't trample, where if they do see an Asian hornet, we're encouraged to watch the direction in which it flies, so that these Asian hornets can be tracked in order to find those nests. And then when those nests are found, they are destroyed. And this photograph on this slide shows how much bigger an Asian hornet is compared with a common wasp. It is much, much larger. And then a particularly unusual invasive species that found its way to Guernsey in 2025 was a squirrel, which came across as part of a shipment on a lorry from Guernsey, and this escaped into the wild, much to the excitement of many members of the population. It got called Elvis, and nobody really knows what happened to this squirrel. It certainly hasn't been seen for many, many months. And then the states of Guernsey have prepared a provisional list of Guernsey Jersey top 10 alert species, and these are plants, animals that we definitely do not want to come to our islands, as we know that they would cause many problems. So it's very much an alert list to look out for these things at our borders. So if you would like to know anything else about the work of the Guernsey Conservation Volunteers, there are some contact details about the invasive species that they remove. Thank you very much for listening to this talk about invasive species. Thank you.